Hello, well it's almost like my favourite subject, embossing leather goods, personalising them, putting names, putting initials on them. That's what I'm going to talk about now. Going to mainly focus on using engraved brass letters in a fairly sophisticated machine. But I want to just briefly touch on embossing in general. And if you just want to get some initials onto an item, you can buy the little stamps from the likes of Tandy and you can stamp in your initials, etc. They're quite effective. They're a little bit tricky to space. You have to do it letter by letter. And sometimes the indentations come in with various sort of pressures, so the eyes always strike through quite hard. But they're fine. If you're just doing a bit, they work well. I've also popped up a couple of films. One was using the prior punch set, and you'll find a film on that in the leather working playlist, which gives you far better spacing of characters. Only slight drawback of that one is you get a little bit of shadowing around the letters because they're not terribly deep. And then the other film I popped up is the cheapest option actually. It's using the plastic cookie cutters, the little plastic letters and numbers that you get for stamping into cookies. And you can use those in leather work with a little press, and actually they're quite effective. You can get the spacing works quite well, they look reasonably good. You're stuck with one font, but they do work quite well. If you're perhaps going a bit more professional, then the next thing up is going to be some form of heated press and using some form of letters in that press. Now again, I've popped a film up on how to make a heated press, and I'll say a bit more about that in just a minute. Engraved letters, if you're going down the route of the more professional approach, then you want to use some form of engraved letter. Now the ones I've got here are engraved brass, and they're hard wearing, lovely and accurate, lovely and crisp. They really are the bee's knees for embossing. You can also get other sort of letters. You can get hot foil letters, which are sometimes made, I think it's Mazak type. It's like a zinc based type, but quite hard. Harder than the Adana press type, the lead based types. So I have seen people use Adana press type, which is quite cheap, and they get reasonably good results. You won't get the same definition necessarily, they're not going to be as hard wearing, but it is a cheap form of getting type. The Mazak for the hot foil are harder, it's a better alloy, and the other thing about it, and this is key actually, is the depth of the letter is usually more if it's going to be used for embossing. So these ones here in brass, the letters are at least 2 millimeters deep, which means the type can sink into the into the leather and not leave like a shadow around it. So you get a lovely, crisp, clear embossing with no shadow. So it really does work well. Now, all of these things come at a price. The brass type is expensive. To buy new, it is very, very expensive. And what I've done is I've bought some second-hand sets. So I've looked around and I've picked them up from time to time. And I haven't got them here in the workshop, I don't keep them here, but I've brought a few down just to show you. And I've actually sort of got a mixture, so I have now got 2 complete sets. But I can also do embossing in an array of letters as well, as I seem to have accumulated along the way. But they're brass, they're standard printer's height, and they have a little groove underneath to mark which is of the right way up. And they're lovely and deep. The engraving is done by a machine, and it really is a lovely deep engraving, so you get a superb embossing. I'll show you how it works in the press. So here's the press. It's a heated press, and there are sort of a couple of key features about it. One is it's got a carriage here which takes the type, and it's self-centering, so it's quite quick and easy to load type into it. And then once you've loaded the type, you release the handle and you can emboss. The other thing, as I say, it's a heated press. Now I have adapted this and I've put one of my special heat controllers on to get very accurate heat, so that I can sort of dial in the heat I want, and it will hold it within 3 or 4 degrees of the temperature that I dial in. And I have popped the film up on how to make one of these units. So I basically stripped off the heater that was on this press, and I've put my own unit in there. So I have also added a thermocouple onto the carriage, but I have covered that in another film on making a hot foil press. So if you like a bit of DIY electronics, as long as you feel you're capable of it, it's quite a good project actually. Let's, regardless, I mean, whatever sort of press, whether it's one like this one, if it's a heated press, they all work in a very similar fashion. So a Kingsley press, for example, if you're in the States, they're quite popular, good presses. And I'll show you sort of the letters and how I load them in the carriage next, and then do a bit of embossing. I've lined up some letters here, so I've got my name, and as you can see, they're quite sort of sturdy. It's all done in brass. It's beautifully done actually. Anyway, let's get going with these. So the sorts of things that I would do in this press, I do little gift moleskine notebooks, and I can emboss someone's name onto these. So on the front, that's the sort of thing that I do with it. So just zooming in to show you the carriage, and I'll pop the letters in. You have to be careful because once it gets up to temperature, it's actually quite hot. The brass letters, you can see, just go on that carriage. You need to check that they're all sort of pushed in level, and then you can tighten it up. And it's self-centering, so as you turn the handles, it comes in from both directions, which is rather nice. Check they're all lying straight, which they are. And what I'll do, I'll just use an off-cutter lever here, and we'll do an embossing. So to do the actual embossing, you have to lower the carriage. I'll come out a little bit. There's a handle on the side here. They'll all be similar, all these presses, in different ways, but that's now ready. And then pull the handle. Doesn't need to be held for long. This is vegetable tanned leather, so that does take the impressions best. And there you have it. Hopefully you can see that all right. It gives you a very nice, clear, well-defined impression. And that's really all there is to it. I mean, you have to make sure you line things up in your table, and it's worth testing and making sure of that. It's worth doing a test run to make sure you got your temperature correct. But otherwise, that's it. If I'm embossing a product with like a pocket, like a notebook, I'll put a metal plate behind so that it doesn't come through on the other side of the notebook. And then when I've finished, those letters will be quite hot. So I haven't done that terribly well. What I do is I put them on the metal plate, and like that I can be certain they won't burn me or the machine. And they cool down. If you put them on their side, they can cool down before you put them away again. So there we are, embossing with nice brass letters and a heated press. Hope you found that one useful and it perhaps gave you an idea or two. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.